Take a deep breath with me. Wherever you are in this moment, whatever weight you're carrying, whatever questions are circling in your mind, just breathe. You're exactly where you need to be. Today, we're going to talk about something that might feel both deeply familiar and somehow distant at the same time. We're going to talk about trusting your relationship with God, not someone else's relationship, not the relationship you think you should have, but your actual, real, beautifully imperfect relationship with the divine. Because here's what I've learned, and maybe you've learned it too. Our relationship with God is just that, a relationship. And like any relationship, it requires trust. It requires vulnerability. It requires us to show up as we are, not as we think we should be. You might be listening to this because you're in a season where trust feels hard. Maybe you've prayed prayers that seem unanswered. Maybe you've walked through valleys that felt endless. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads, desperately wanting to hear God's voice, and all you hear is silence. Or maybe you're in a good season, but you know that trust is something you need to continually cultivate. Something you need to feed and water and tend to, like a garden that can't be neglected. Wherever you are, you're welcome here. Your doubts are welcome. Your questions are welcome. Your confusion and your clarity are both welcome. Because God isn't afraid of any of it. Understanding relationship over religion. Let's start here. God is not looking for your perfection. He's looking for your presence. So many of us were taught about God before we were introduced to God. We learnt the rules before we learned the relationship. We memorized what we should do before we understood who we were talking to. And somewhere, in all that learning, all that striving, all that trying to get it right, the relationship got lost. But God never wanted a religion. He wanted a relationship. From the very beginning, in the garden, when everything was still perfect and untouched by shame, what did God do? He walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. He didn't lecture from a distance. He didn't send messages through intermediaries. He walked with them. He was present with them. That's what he wants with you. Not your perfectly crafted prayers, not your impressive spiritual resume, not your ability to check all the boxes. He wants to walk with you. He wants the real you, the messy you, the you that doesn't have it all figured out. Trust begins when we stop performing and start relating, when we stop trying to earn what's already been freely given, when we stop hiding our real selves and start showing up honestly. Think about the relationships in your life that you trust most deeply. What makes them trustworthy? It's not perfection, is it? It's presence. It's consistency. It's the way someone shows up for you again and again, even when it's hard, even when you're difficult, even when you're not at your best. God has been showing up for you since before you knew how to call his name. He's been there in every season, every struggle, every moment of doubt. He's never left. He's never given up. He's never looked at you and thought, this is too much, I'm done. The question isn't whether God is trustworthy. The question is whether we're willing to trust what we already know deep down to be true, that we are loved, we are known, and we are held by something far greater than ourselves. The practice of showing up as you are. Here's something that might change everything for you. God already knows. He knows what you did yesterday. He knows what you're ashamed of. He knows the thoughts you've never spoken out loud. He knows the ways you've failed, the ways you've hurt others, the ways you've hurt yourself. He knows the darkness you try to hide. He knows it all, and he's still here, still loving you, still calling you his own. So, why do we hide? Why do we put on masks when we come to him in prayer? Why do we clean ourselves up before approaching the one who already sees everything? It's because we've confused intimacy with impression. We think we need to impress God with our righteousness, our spiritual growth, our moral improvement. But intimacy doesn't require impression. Intimacy requires honesty. David understood this. The man after God's own heart wasn't perfect. He committed adultery. He committed murder. He made devastating mistakes that hurt people he loved and people he was called to lead. But when you read the Psalms, you see someone who knew how to show up honestly before God. David didn't hide his anger. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? He didn't hide his fear. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. He didn't hide his shame. Against you, you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. This is the kind of relationship God wants. Not the sanitized version, not the highlight reel. The real thing, the full thing, the honest thing. When you come to God as you actually are, something beautiful happens. You discover that he was already there, in that exact place, waiting for you. Not waiting for you to get better or clean up or figure it out, just waiting for you to show up. Trust grows in that space, in the space of radical honesty, in the space where you stop pretending and start being real. Because you can't trust someone you're hiding from. You can't build intimacy with someone you're performing for. Think about what you're carrying right now. The worry that wakes you up at 3 a.m., the regret that won't quite let you go, the fear about the future, the disappointment about the present, the grief about the past. God is big enough for all of it. Not just the pretty parts, not just the parts that make you look spiritual, all of it, every single piece. You don't have to wait until you're in a better place emotionally. You don't have to wait until your faith feels stronger. You don't have to wait until you've processed your doubt or worked through your questions. Come as you are, right now, in this moment. That's where trust begins. In the coming, in the showing up, in the choosing to be honest instead of impressive. When God's ways don't make sense. Let's talk about what might be the hardest part of trusting God. When His ways don't make sense to us. You pray for healing and the sickness continues. You pray for provision and the bills keep coming. You pray for relationship restoration and the silence deepens. You pray for clarity and the fog thickens. In these moments, trust isn't easy. It isn't natural. It doesn't feel good. In fact, it can feel like the hardest thing you've ever done. Isaiah 55:8-9 tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We read that verse, and sometimes it feels comforting, but sometimes, if we're honest, it feels frustrating, because we want to understand. We want it to make sense. We want to see the full picture, the complete plan, the reason behind the wait. But trust doesn't require understanding. That's what makes it trust. If you could see the whole path, if you knew every step, if you understood every reason, you wouldn't need trust. You'd have certainty. Think about Abraham. God told him to leave everything familiar and go to a land he'd never seen. God didn't give him a map, didn't give him a timeline, didn't give him all the details, just a promise and a direction. And Abraham had to choose. Trust or turn back. Think about Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. Year after year after year, his circumstances screamed that God had abandoned him. But decades later, he could look back and say to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." In the middle of those years, Joseph couldn't see the good. He couldn't see how it would all work together. He had to trust without seeing. He had to believe without understanding. And maybe that's where you are right now. In the middle years, the waiting years. The years where nothing makes sense and God seems silent and you're doing everything you know to do, but nothing is changing. Can I tell you something? Your faithfulness in this season matters. Your choice to trust when you can't see, to believe when you don't understand, to hold on when every logical reason tells you to let go, it matters. Not because God needs to see your performance, but because this is where your faith becomes real. This is where trust moves from theory to practice. God doesn't waste your waiting. He doesn't waste your pain. He doesn't waste the seasons that feel empty or the prayers that seem unanswered. He's working in ways you can't see, preparing things you can't imagine, orchestrating connections and timing and circumstances that are far beyond your ability to arrange. But you won't see it all now. You might not see it for years. And that's where trust comes in. Trust says, "I don't understand, but I believe you're good. I can't see the path, but I believe you're leading. I'm afraid, but I believe you're with me." Trust doesn't mean you won't have questions. It doesn't mean you won't struggle. It doesn't mean you won't have moments where you cry out in frustration or confusion or grief. Jesus himself cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's okay to ask why. It's okay to wrestle. It's okay to struggle with trust. What matters is that you keep showing up. You keep bringing your questions to God instead of using them as reasons to walk away. You keep choosing relationship even when you don't get answers. The whisper beneath the noise. One of the greatest challenges to trusting God is the noise. Not just external noise, though there's plenty of that, but internal noise. The voices in your head that question, that doubt, that remind you of every reason not to trust. Maybe it's the voice of past disappointment, the prayers you prayed that didn't get answered the way you wanted, the times you felt abandoned, the moments when God seemed absent and you had to figure it out on your own. Maybe it's the voice of comparison, looking at other people's stories, other people's answered prayers, other people's seeming ease with faith, and wondering why your journey looks so different. Maybe it's the voice of fear. What if you trust and get hurt again? What if you open your heart and nothing changes? What if you're wrong about God's goodness? These voices are loud. They're persistent. They know exactly what to say to make you question everything you believe. But underneath all that noise, there's a whisper. It's quiet. It's gentle. It's easy to miss if you're not listening for it. But it's always there. It's the whisper that says, "You're going to be okay." It's the whisper that says, "I haven't forgotten you." It's the whisper that says, "I'm doing something you can't see yet." That whisper is the voice of God, and trust is learning to listen for it beneath all the other voices. Elijah learned this. He was exhausted, running from danger, convinced he was the only one left who still believed. God could have shown up in the earthquake or the fire or the mighty wind, but instead, he came in a whisper, a still, small voice. Because God doesn't have to shout to be powerful. He doesn't have to compete with the noise. He waits for you to get still enough, quiet enough, present enough to hear him. That's why trust requires stillness. Not because God is hiding or playing games, but because his voice is often found in the quiet, in the pause between breaths, in the moment just before sleep, in the early morning when everything is still. When you're surrounded by noise, by fear, by anxiety, by doubt, by other people's opinions, by your own harsh self-judgment, it's almost impossible to hear that whisper. But it's there, always there, constant as your heartbeat. Trust is choosing to quiet the noise long enough to listen. It's choosing to create space for God's voice instead of being drowned out by every other voice demanding your attention. This might mean turning off your phone for a while. It might mean saying no to the constant scroll of social media. It might mean stepping away from certain relationships or conversations that stir up doubt instead of faith. It definitely means creating space for silence, for stillness, for being present with God without an agenda, without a list of requests, without trying to figure everything out. Just being, just listening, just trusting that the God who spoke the universe into existence can speak to you too, if you're willing to listen. Trusting the process, not just the outcome. Here's something we often get wrong. We think trust is about believing God will give us the outcome we want. But real trust is about believing God is good even if the outcome isn't what we hoped for. This is hard. This challenges everything in us that wants control, that wants guarantees, that wants to know how the story ends before we commit to the journey. We want to trust God for the job, for the healing, for the relationship, for the breakthrough. And those aren't wrong things to want. They're not wrong things to pray for. But if our trust is contingent on getting what we ask for, we're not really trusting God. We're trusting our own vision of what should happen. True trust says, "God, I believe you're good whether or not you give me what I'm asking for. I believe you love me whether or not this turns out the way I hope. I believe you're with me whether this season is easy or hard." That's the trust that can withstand disappointment. That's the trust that can survive unanswered prayers. That's the trust that doesn't crumble when life doesn't go according to plan. Jesus demonstrated this in Gethsemane. He asked the Father to remove the cup of suffering if it was possible. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." He wanted a different outcome. He asked for a different outcome, but his trust wasn't dependent on getting it. How do we get there? How do we build that kind of trust? I think it starts with remembering all the times God has been faithful before. Not in the way you expected, maybe. Not in the timing you wanted, necessarily. But faithful nonetheless. Remember the time you thought you couldn't survive, but you did. Remember the time the door closed and you were devastated, only to discover later that it was protecting you from something harmful. Remember the time you had to walk through something hard and you found a strength in yourself you didn't know was there. Because God was there. Write those memories down. Tell those stories to yourself. Build altars of remembrance like the Israelites did, physical reminders of God's faithfulness, so that when you're in a season of doubt, you have something to return to. Trust also grows when we focus on who God is, not just what God does. Because what God does will sometimes confuse us. The way He works will sometimes frustrate us. The timing will sometimes test us. But who He is never changes. He is good. He is loving. He is faithful. He is present. He is powerful. He is wise. He sees you. He knows you. He cares. When you root your trust in His character instead of His actions, you build a foundation that can withstand storms. Because even when you don't understand what He's doing, you can trust who He is. This kind of trust transforms how you walk through hard seasons. Instead of spiraling into panic when things don't go as planned, you can breathe and say, I don't understand this, but I trust you. Instead of feeling betrayed when prayers aren't answered the way you hoped, you can grieve honestly while still believing in God's goodness. It doesn't make the pain disappear. It doesn't make the disappointment vanish, but it gives you an anchor, something solid to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. The trust that shows up daily. Trust isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. Sometimes it's a minute-by-minute practice. You wake up and you have to choose. Will I trust today? Will I believe that God is with me today? Will I surrender today's unknowns to Him? And then tomorrow, you wake up and choose again. And the day after that. And the day after that. This is why Jesus taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. Not this year's bread, not this month's bread. Today's bread. Because trust is built in the daily choosing, the daily showing up, the daily surrender. Some days, trust feels easy. You wake up feeling peaceful, feeling connected, feeling certain of God's presence. Those days are gifts. Enjoy them. Let them strengthen you. But other days, trust feels impossible. You wake up anxious or afraid or angry or numb. The mountain ahead looks too steep. The burden feels too heavy. You don't know how you're going to make it through. On those days, trust looks like getting up anyway, putting one foot in front of the other anyway, doing the next right thing even though you can't see 10 steps ahead. Trust isn't about having perfect faith every moment. It's about continuing to choose relationship with God even when your faith feels weak. It's about bringing your weakness to Him instead of hiding it. It's about saying, I'm struggling to trust today, but I'm still here. I'm still showing up. That's enough. Your presence is enough. Your willingness is enough. You don't have to manufacture feelings you don't have. You don't have to pretend to be more certain than you are. Just show up. Keep showing up. That's what trust looks like in human form. And here's what happens when you do. Slowly, gradually, often imperceptibly, trust becomes more natural. Not easier, necessarily, but more familiar. Like a path you've walked so many times that your feet know the way even in the dark. You build history with God. You accumulate moments where you chose to trust and He proved faithful. Not always in the way you expected, but faithful nonetheless. And those moments become touchstones you can return to. Every small act of trust matters. Every time you choose to believe instead of despair, to hope instead of give up, to surrender instead of control, it matters. You're building something. You're developing spiritual muscle. You're creating a pattern that will serve you well in the seasons ahead. Trust is also strengthened in community. You're not meant to do this alone. God gave us each other for a reason. When your faith is weak, someone else's faith can carry you. When you can't see clearly, someone else might have the perspective you need. When you're tempted to give up, someone else can remind you of what's true. Don't isolate in your struggle. Don't hide your doubts or pretend everything is fine when it's not. Find safe people who can walk with you, pray with you, remind you of God's faithfulness when you've forgotten. And be that person for others too. Share your story. Talk about the times God has shown up for you. Speak hope into someone else's darkness. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to keep trusting. Rest in the relationship. There's something we need to address before we finish. The exhaustion that can come from trying too hard to trust. Sometimes we make trust another thing we have to get right. Another spiritual discipline to master. Another area where we're failing and need to do better. But trust isn't about striving. It's about resting. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Rest for your souls. That's what trust offers. Not more work, not more effort, not more trying to get it right. Rest. Rest in knowing you're loved. Rest in knowing you're held. Rest in knowing that God's got this, even when you don't. Rest in knowing that your worth isn't tied to your performance, your productivity, or your spiritual progress. You can rest because God isn't anxious. He's not worried about your future. He's not scrambling to figure out how to make things work. He's not surprised by what you're facing. He's not overwhelmed by the complexity of your situation. He's got this, and you can rest in that. This doesn't mean you become passive or lazy. It doesn't mean you stop taking action or making effort, but it means you stop carrying what was never yours to carry. You stop trying to control what you can't control. You stop pretending you have to have all the answers. You do your part, and you let God do his part. You take action where you can, and you surrender what you can't. You show up faithfully, and you trust him with the results. That's the rhythm of trust. Faithfulness and surrender, action and rest, doing your part and releasing the outcome. When you live in that rhythm, you stop exhausting yourself trying to make things happen. You stop staying up at night trying to figure everything out. You stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. You remember that you have a Father who loves you, who's powerful enough to handle what you're facing, who's wise enough to know what you need before you ask, who's present enough to never leave you on your own. And in that remembering, you can breathe, you can rest, you can trust. Closing, as we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with this. Your relationship with God is yours. It's unique, it's personal, it's not going to look like anyone else's, and that's exactly how it should be. Don't compare your journey to someone else's. Don't measure your faith against another person's testimony. Don't feel guilty because your process looks different or takes longer or includes more questions. God isn't comparing you to anyone else. He's delighting in you. In your specific personality, your particular struggles, your unique way of processing and growing and learning to trust. He's not disappointed in you. He's not frustrated with your questions or your doubts or your struggles. He's not keeping score of your failures or measuring how far you still have to go. He's walking with you, right where you are, in this exact season, with all its complexity and confusion and beauty and mess. And he's inviting you to trust him. Not perfectly, not without questions, not without struggle. Just trust, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. Bring him your real self, your honest thoughts, your actual feelings. Show up as you are, not as you think you should be. Let him love you in your weakness, not just in your strength. Let him meet you in your doubt, not just in your certainty. Because that's where real relationship happens. That's where trust grows. That's where you discover that God is not just the God of the mountaintops, but the God of the valleys too. Not just the God of the breakthroughs, but the God of the waiting. Not just the God of the moments when everything makes sense, but the God of the seasons when nothing does. He's with you, always with you, in every moment, every season, every circumstance. You can trust him, not because life will always be easy, or because you'll always understand, or because everything will work out exactly as you hope, but because he is good, because he is faithful, because he loves you more than you can possibly imagine. And that's enough. That's more than enough. So breathe, rest, trust. You're safe in his hands. You always have been. You always will be. And that's a relationship you can count on, today and every day to come.